We have a real treat on the Star Sport podcast this week. We are joined by performance nutritionist Daniel Davey, the well-known founder of Davey Nutrition, who is a brand ambassador for Glenilen Farm. And the good news for everyone here in West Cork is that Daniel will be here quite soon on Glenilen Farm in Drimoleague on Thursday, May 16th. And we've been promised, Daniel, it's an evening of rich insights and lots of yogurt. So before we get to chat about the event on May 16th, just first off, thanks for coming on the podcast. Great to have you on.
Great to be on.
And just to chat to you first about, you've been a performance nutritionist for well over a decade now, but can you fill us in on how you came to be in this position? Like, you started home at Sligo, so how did a young fella from Sligo end up to be, let's say, the guest of honour in Drimoleague on May 16th? Join the dots for us.
There's a good few dots in between. I suppose I grew up on a farm where food was really important, and farming is a way of life in this country, and we care about the land, we care about our animals. And I guess for me, sport was a big part of my life from a very, very young age. I had a football at my foot at 18 months, and I wanted to understand everything that could impact performance first. And as I got a little bit older, it was about understanding health. So I guess if you move 25, 26 years from growing up on a farm, it was, what was my next ambition? Apart from being a sports person myself, I wanted to help people perform at their physical and mental best. And I wanted to do it at the top table in sport. Who are the two teams, I guess? When you're growing up, for me, it was Brian O'Driscoll, and it was athletes who I played Gaelic football myself, so it was the Dublin football team that really inspired me. And I was very, very fortunate to spend a good part of my career, nearly 10 years, working with both of those teams. And since then, that was a big chapter in my life, one of the most exhilarating. And then it's been a really interesting next phase, going out on my own, trying to make the concept of performance and nutrition as accessible as possible to the general public. So the last 2 years, I've linked up with Glenilen Farm about communicating the value of their products, but also there's really shared values around the importance of good food for great health.
Have you seen yourself over the years, and you probably see it more than most, that we're becoming a lot more aware of what we're putting into our body, we're becoming a lot more aware of diets, we're becoming a lot more aware of eating healthy? Have you noticed that yourself?
I think there's been a big explosion for sure. Social media has had a major role to play in it. And I think as time has gone on, we're understanding that there's a really good connection between what we do and how we live and how we eat and our health. So there's still serious issues with things like lifestyle related diseases, and they're only unfortunately starting to grow. So there's a bit of a separation. There's people who have become almost too focused and on the granular detail of nutrition, and then there's people who don't take it seriously enough. So that divide is still there. But I think, yes, with more access to information, and people are generally more conscious, for sure.
And you mentioned there about working with the Dublin footballers and the Leinster rugby team. I've seen you described as their secret weapon in some articles I was reading up beforehand. For you to work with athletes at that level, talk to us about that. What was that like?
It's all I ever wanted to do. And I guess what you want to experience is, can you impact their performance at the highest level, where it's not just about percentages, it's fractions of percentages, and it's decisions that are made at the most critical times that define seasons. And I wanted to be a part of that. And it was absolutely incredible. I guess the most fascinating thing for me is that those types of athletes want to improve all the time. It's never ending. So I think there's a bit of a misconception in the broader world about what it means, but what they understand is that just doing the fundamentals of eating your potatoes and your vegetables and doing that really consistently at the right time will allow you to train hard and perform really amazing feats of mental and physical performance.
Actually, just on that, how important is that, the timing of when you eat when you're training, and let's say before a game, or if it's a race, or so on, whoever you're working with, the timing of when you eat, what impact can that have on performance?
Well, almost it can mean that you can perform at your best, or it can mean that you completely hit the wall. I mean, it can define the outcome of a competition match or even a training session. And I get a lot of questions about, what do you eat pre-competition, or what's the pre-match meal? Whereas, the preparation starts days beforehand. And if you haven't eaten really well in the days leading into your competition, you simply won't have enough energy to perform that session or that competition at your absolute best. So performance nutrition is defined by the volume of food that you eat and when you eat it. So people, athletes, we all eat the same types of foods. It's what you eat, when you eat it, and how much that becomes very important if you want to perform at your best. So a very simple guideline is, if it's competition, you're eating your last main meal 2 to 4 hours beforehand. And if it's training, generally it's 2 to 3 hours before your training session. And then again, so you've got phase of preparation, then you've got your 2 key phases of recovery. You've got your immediate recovery after your training or competition. And so that's within the hour. And then within 3 hours, you need to eat again to make sure that you're replacing the energy, replacing the fluids, getting protein and carbohydrate on board to start the recovery and adaptation processes.
And obviously, like we're saying there, like you've worked with the best of the best, the elite athletes. But let's say for a club footballer in West Cork, or a soccer player from the West Cork League, is almost the same approach. They can use the same approach when it comes to their diet and preparing for training and games.
And ultimately, that's what I'm trying to communicate to the world, that you can apply exactly the same principles. And, club football is at a very, very high level now in Ireland. You got teams at a club level. There's lots of teams that are almost at inter-county level. So it's exactly the same practices. And I use very simple analogies. And I say to people, just think about all of the habits that allow you to feel energized and to be at your best. And what performance is about is putting as many of those things or habits together as possible. So when you drink, how much fluid that you consume when you consume it, and it's the same with food. What foods sit really well with you, and when do you eat them? And it's clearly just putting that into a system or a process that you apply repeatedly over the course of time. People tend to get bored, whereas at maybe at a more elite level, there's an acceptance that it's just about doing these things really consistently that will allow you to perform at your best. So it's not getting bored with those basics that are so important.
You've probably been asked this question an awful lot, Daniel, but what are the kind of the go-to foods and the don't touch foods? Is there some foods there you tell our listeners and readers, lads, don't go near them, and there's other foods you're saying you should try and incorporate them into your diet as much as possible?
Yeah, and there's a very simple hierarchy when it comes to nutrition that can be used as a reference point for anybody. So you got to think about energy in terms of the calories you consume. Then it's the combination of carbohydrate, protein, and fat. Don't worry, we'll move through this pretty quickly and we get to the foods, but it's important to give this kind of context. So protein is your meat, your dairy, your fish. Your carbohydrate is things like your potato, your rice, your pasta, your bread, and then healthy fats, nuts, seeds, fish, and oils. And what we need at every meal is a balance of those. So it's a very simple mixed meal approach. Yet people, believe it or not, don't tend to get this right. Like they'll get up in the morning and they just have cereal, or they might just have toast. Whereas if you get up in the morning and you have a cereal, which is like a porridge or a muesli, and you mix it with some yogurt and you got some berries, now we've got a mixed meal. Now it's the same with your bread. If you're having toast with beans or you're having toast with eggs, now we're mixing nutrients, which provides all of the combinations that you need for sustained energy. If you move through the day, then it would be remiss of me not to mention again Glenilen Farm, the yogurt that you can combine with fruit or make a smoothie. There we've got a snack. Lunchtime can be a frittata, it can be last night's dinner, which I regularly do. If I make a lasagna or make a curry, a chili, Spaghetti, leftover meals from the night before are brilliant for lunch. Of course, it can be a simple sandwich, but make sure that you got plenty of vegetables in the form of salad and tomato and lettuce, maybe a bit of red onion or scallion in there. And in the afternoon, you're mixing up different types of fruits, maybe some nuts and seeds. And dinner is usually, people are pretty good, particularly in this country, even if it is meat and 3 veg. Yeah. Potato and 2 other vegetables. And that is a very consistent way of approaching your meals. So if you can combine those key nutrients and keep it varied. So it's been found from a gut health perspective. So to really benefit our gut for our immune system and for our mood and the access to key nutrients, we need variety. Mm-hmm. So we need a minimum of 30 different types of fruit and vegetables in any given week. And if we're doing that, mixing our meals, honestly, we're going to be in a really good place when it comes to our overall health. We're just not that good at being consistent with it.
And that actually preempted my next question. That consistency, how important is that? I'll hold my hands up. I could be a terror sometimes for, let's say, in my line of work on a Wednesday deadline day, I'll work through lunch. So I effectively skip lunch that day. Like, how can people build in consistency into their day to make sure that they're getting that consistent food?
I'll use a quick sports analogy here because it keeps it really relevant. So if you think about a Gaelic footballer and you think about a kick pass, that kick pass needs to be repeated in training regularly for it to be at a high level. You know, that's the bottom line. But we don't think about our food like that. We don't think about it being practiced, but we also don't think about the conversation part. So good nutrition comes from, as you said, the consistency. But if you've got something on a Wednesday that demands more of your time, you need a really good breakfast, right? You need a snack before you go online, on air, whatever it might be. And then you've got a plan for when you come off. So one of the things is that you've thought about that particular time period. So I call those moments, everybody has them in the week, pinch points. They're the points in the time where you're under the most physical and mental demand, but you've done the least thought or preparation for it. But if you can get ahead and go, on a Sunday, Wednesday is a key day, right? This is the breakfast I'm going to have. This is the snack I'm going to have. This is what I have after those long meetings are done. You're not coming home starving in the evening. And that happens really frequently, particularly in really busy lives where people, sometimes they go 6-7 hours without eating and you're ravenous. And it's very hard to stick then to eating the right proportion of food.
You mentioned about obviously the consistency of meals. There's a myth out there you shouldn't eat after 6 o'clock. Is there any truth in that, or?
So what matters most, if we go back to that hierarchy, is what are we eating over the course of the entire 24 hours? So our body doesn't work in, what are we having at breakfast, lunch, and dinner? How our metabolism works is, what are the foods that come into our body over a 24-hour period? So if you think about that 6 o'clock, everybody's day is very different. Some people are going to bed at 9 o'clock, but some people are shift workers. Some people are training in the evenings. So there's a whole different set of variables and factors that creates a different context around that meal. So if you've trained, for example, late in the evening, you have to eat. Or if you've got training at 8 o'clock, you need to eat at 5 o'clock. Think about that 2 to 3 hours beforehand. But by and large, so what you're actually talking about is the scientific terminology. It's called chrononutrition. So it's the time of when we eat. And if we can eat off a very simple principle, so 12 hours of fasting, 12-hour periods where we eat, it's not that complicated. So if you get up in the morning at 7 o'clock, this is just generally, take exercise and everything else out of it. Generally speaking, your last meal, if it's at 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, that's absolutely fine. But when you're eating, you're eating every 3 to 4 hours. So that's 4 meals over the course of the day. And it gives you enough time to digest your food and sleep well. By and large, we're more effective and efficient at metabolizing calories earlier in the day. And it's usually not the healthiest of food that the problem is with late evening eating. It's not that you're sitting down to eat bacon and cabbage. It might be you've already eaten your bacon and cabbage, or you've already eaten your dinner, your curry or chili, and you're sitting down and you're having 4 or 5 biscuits with a cup of tea.
You mentioned yogurts earlier, and obviously this event coming up in Glenilen Farm on May 16th. Talk to me a small bit about yogurts and their importance and their value in their nutritional value.
Well, I think because we see so much yogurt now, yogurt is a big part of what people do tend to eat and identify as being a healthy food. Sometimes we can take a little bit for granted. But if we're eating yogurt with added cultures, that doesn't have much done to it and not a whole lot of flavoring or a whole lot of sweeteners like Glenilen Farm produce, it's an incredibly high quality food. So it not only provides a source of energy, a great source of protein, a very versatile way of having a snack. It has a massive impact on the microbiome. So it's what we call a fermented food. It's something that milk is with added cultures, changes through that process into yogurt. And yogurt is something, as I said, that's very versatile. From a sports person's perspective, you've got a source of protein in there. There's a source of calcium. And then, like I said, the added cultures is really beneficial. And we're only just really starting to understand how important our microbiome or our gut health is. And that's the balance of good bacteria to bad bacteria. So it's something, I mean, even with my kids and my children, I'm always encouraging them to include in their diet.
And is this something that you hope to expand on when you come down to Drimoleague on May 16th? Like we're hoping to get a big group of people there, a big gang of people to Glenilen Farm on that day. Sports enthusiasts, everyone is invited. So what can people expect when they come along that evening?
Well, I think it's great to do live events now, and I'm delighted to hear that tickets are. There's actually not that many even left at this point. I know that there's been great demand. I know there is some left, but it's great to hear that there's that level of interest. And I suppose that, to one of your earlier questions, it highlights the interest that people have in their health. Mm-hmm. For me, it's about giving people the opportunity to ask questions, and it's about bringing a little bit more depth to the conversation around health and performance. So if somebody is interested in understanding the key components with a little bit more detail of what makes a really healthy diet for long health, for longevity and for really good health as we age, but also maybe there's active people, sports people who want to understand a little bit more about the timing and the specific foods and the way that you structure your meals to get the most out of the exercise that you're doing. But I think it's there's also another part about inspiring people, giving people a little bit more context around the mindset in relation to food, because there's a huge psychological component to it. And if you get that part right, that feeds back to your other really good question about the consistency. So if people feel just how important and the value of food, then they're more likely to implement it, and it adds real value to their lives. And that's why I am so excited about doing something with Glenilen Farm. It's like there's such a shared sense of value around the importance of food, and it's going to be a bit of crack. We're going to have a bit of fun, and I think that's an important thing as well. Like I love what I do, and I really care about the nutrition space, but I'm very relaxed about the whole experience, which makes people feel like they can have a conversation that's quite normal.
You've actually raised a brilliant point there, and I've never thought about it, Daniel. Almost your psychological approach to nutrition and to food. It's like we obviously take it for granted. Like we need food to survive, and it's the fuel for our bodies. But to think about it in that term psychologically, that's quite an important mind shift as well.
When I was a little boy, my grandmother, she used to say to me all the time, she used to say, "Eat up." And the two books that I wrote was all about the concept of adding in. And I feel, if I went into a room now and I asked them, what's people's instinctive response to the word nutrition? That 50% of people have a negative response. And that's because of modern society's reductionist type of attitude to food. Where are we cutting calories? What's bad? What do I need to reduce? What do I need to avoid? Oh, you shouldn't eat too much of this, sugar, fat, all of this. My philosophy is about nourishing your body, how food can help you in terms of your mood, your performance. So it's this investment. And I have seen repeatedly that if you take an attitude where you're developing a very positive relationship with food, where you're seeing it and viewing it as this investment, there's a massive uplift. So energy levels improve, people's attitudes change, and they start to see, oh, this is energizing. This is really positive. And the outcomes from that are great health.
Brilliant. And finally, you said there, like, you love people asking questions. My wife was particularly excited when I told her I was having a chat on the podcast with you, Daniel. She's one of your many hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram. And she wanted me to ask you, what sort of food could you nibble on at night that's not high in fat?
Well, you know, the first thing, I suppose, and I go back to it, is what matters is the whole 24-hour period. And if you've got a good structure, so a quick side story, I'm terrible for doing this, and I'll come back to your question. I worked with an athlete over COVID, and he had some weight to lose. And when he came to me, we identified lunch as being such an important time. And why lunch was such an important time for him was that he used to skip lunch or not eat enough at lunchtime and come home really hungry. So people don't, you talk, again, I'm using a lot of your references here, to join the dots. He was not joining the dots to how important that meal was to what he was doing in the evening. So if you've got good structure, you will nibble less in the evening, and eating more protein, particularly early in the day, breakfast at lunch, is very important for that. If you make a homemade snack, so you make something like a homemade cookie or make a homemade protein bar, or what I have all the time is it's some dark chocolate or a dark chocolate snack. Or actually, do you know what's brilliant as well is even a little bit of yogurt and granola or some dark chocolate shavings over yogurt is another great one that athletes would often use. But not to worry too much about the fat component. Worry more about the overall proportion and the experience, because it's about enjoying something that's satisfying and that you don't eat too much of. And that can be something that is consistent. So you're not going up and down all the time and jumping from one thing to another.
Absolutely brilliant. If this is only a fraction of the insight that those lucky people will get into Glenilen Farm on Thursday, May 16th. It's going to be a fantastic event. Like you said, Daniel, there's a couple of tickets left. So whoever's listening to this podcast, go get those tickets because they will be snapped up quite soon. So thank you again. Thank you so much for coming on, Daniel. Really enjoyed this chat, and the very best of luck on May 16th in
Appreciate it. Thank you.